That's why I took the steps, Sam, of what I did, because I was not afraid. This is part two. I'm continually on with my story in detail. It's why I continued, because I had that passion. I didn't have any fear. So it didn't matter what anybody said. And all my life, through revolution, I've always been able to focus. You know, looking back, yes, I had management go after me. They had sent security guards to watch me. Um, Everything, every trick they would try under the book, I was always ahead. Okay, I've been an undercover spy for the union, and I know all the management's and corporations' tricks and what they do to uh, destroy workers' unions and get unions out, the cost sabotage union workers or sabotage workers that are trying to organize on cutting costs. I went to a seminar and I saw how, as an undercover, how managers use consultant firms and so forth. So yes, I spent many years gathering secret information from the companies to the union, because I wanted justice to be done no matter what it took. I took on a big campaign where HCA Columbia, a for-profit hospital who got vandalized by the Federal Bureau investigation by the FBI for misuse of funds and also healthcare fraud and all these kind of things. They were going to merge with Sharp Healthcare Hospitals and make Sharp Healthcare a for-profit instead of a non-profit. I got involved with the United Nurses Association of California union, and also the union I was involved in, United Hospital Healthcare Employees Union Local 1199. We had a campaign going against HCA Columbia, trying to convert the Sharp hospitals into a for-profit chain. The general state attorney, we had a campaign where we involved the Pink Panthers, we involved many organizations, and I continually helped get involved in this campaign, and we won, and the general state attorney stepped in of California, and HCA Columbia got kicked out, and goodbye Columbia. They were sneaking in their supplies into the Sharp hospitals, and Columbia employees were they were sneaking as employees disguised as Sharp employees with the Sharp badges. They were bringing in toilet paper, Columbia toilet paper, the computer systems, the data systems, informational systems, all this stuff. And of course, I always had ways to get information about the for-profit chain company. We have a research company that I was involved with in Washington, D.C., with the unions and research and the labor movement, of being able to find out about companies and what they do and all the secrecies that are behind that, okay? This is why I'm so detail oriented in what's going on behind the scenes, okay? And me, as a revolutionist, as a child getting out of special education, I decided to be my own mission spy and rebel to get out of special education. Back in the 60s, let me tell you, Sam, there was a lot of change, okay? I lived and saw when J.F. Kennedy was assassinated. I remember getting out of school early, and everything was closed and shut down when our president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. I remember the protests and the riots that went on during Martin Luther Jr., okay, and J.F. Kennedy Jr., okay. I remember the Watts in 1965. I remember the changes in the 60s when the Title Section 7, discrimination against race, religion, and so forth, that's when the laws started changing. So the 60s were, and I remember also, not only that, 1967 with LGBT is Stonewall, the riots that took place because of police brutality. And so the Watts, not the Watts, the Stonewall riots in 1967, when police were dragging gays out of the bars and beating them, um, we as a LGBT community said this was enough. Just like the police brutality in 1965 and the Rodney King in 1992. Okay, so I lived to see all kinds of revolutionary change, and the 60s was a real major change. And my dad was raised as a labor leader, which I am grateful to God that I learned about the labor leader movement. In high school, I learned about labor history. They don't even teach that anymore today in the schools unless you go to colleges or universities, which I'm grateful that I went in the 19 to college to learn labor law and labor history, and I'm glad I had some of that in high school. Today it's a whole different shift paradigm. Okay, so this is why I've always questioned everything from the time I was a Roman Catholic. I questioned the theology to the catechism, religious instruction teachers, to the school psychologists when I was put in special education. I would ask them questions because my diagnosis was in school. My first grade teacher flunked me, and my kindergarten teacher was shocked. She saw me as a very meticulous, curious student, normal student in kindergarten. And when my first grade teacher flunked me, and it shocked my kindergarten teacher. My first grade teacher actually said, literally, and I remember word for word, she had said, John is beneath his level of ability, acts like a baby, needs to be retested for the MR program. He fails to attempt to complete his homework assignments. His highest interest is in the field of music. Gene Harding, November 26, 1964, Room 1, Sycamore Canyon School, Santee School District. And this was like 2-3 days after J.F. Kennedy got assassinated. So I remember going home from school early when the Kennedy got assassinated, the president, okay? So I was diagnosed borderline retardation by the school psychologist on Stanford Binet and autism. That was my uh, diagnosis. And the school psychologist, Mrs. Lily Kawamura, she was Japanese, full-blooded Japanese. She did all my testing. Every 2 years she would test me with a Stanford Binet intelligence test, the Wechsler Children Intelligence Scale test, and the wide range achievement tests, all that. And of course, borderline retardation was the diagnosis. And of course, they told my parents that I needed to stay in the program. I, of course, disagreed. I always was ahead of my students and helped them with their work. Yes, I had weak subjects, math and reading comprehension, but you see, that does not determine a person being borderline retardation. I don't have to be a psychologist to know that, okay? Well, when the 1970s were a complete change from the 60s, they started integrating the special education students. I, being in the special ed program in 1970-71, they came up with integrating special ed students with regular classes. They call it a transition program, meaning transitioning special ed students out of special ed to regular school classes. I wanted that. I definitely wanted that. And I had a very dear neighbor friend of mine, Hartha Jackson, who's still alive. She's in her 80s today. She wanted me in that program, but she would argue with the school psychologist and the school board and teachers to get me into regular classes. I argued that as well. Then I decided at 13 to be a rebel. Now, this is what I didn't write publicly, but I will share this to you. I have a video on YouTube, but I've got to update it. But I will share this to you, Brother Sam, because you are my brother and you are my family. And I want you to know the full length of my testimony here as a revolutionist and as an activist. I decided at age 13 to be a rebel, and I wanted to get out of special ed. And my dad always favored the school side. My mother had passion and understanding and empathy, and she felt for me and understood my side. Well, I had a neighbor that I looked up to. Her name was Elizabeth Wadlow, and she was from Missouri, and she was taught elementary school in El Cajon. She was a neighbor that we kids always loved, and we called her Grandma. We called her Grandma Wadlow, and she was just adorable. She loved people. She loved God. She played the piano. She taught kids in school. She loved nature. She was just down to earth and loved people. Well, she always looked up to me and felt I was very intelligent, and she held her fist up and said, "Aren't you afraid to speak up? Why are you so afraid to speak up? You should be able to go to regular school. If you were my son, I'd take you out of those classes." And she told me her experience that she had a student that she taught was slow, but she never pushed him to be in special ed. She just helped him, coached along. And another teacher, of course, flunked him and put him in special ed. She just totally resented that. Well, her in words of encouragement really encouraged me to stand, and I just something a light bulb it went into my head as a teenager. I was not a normal teenager, by the way, because as a teenager, you're playing around with other kids, you're socializing, doing things, which my mind was meticulously on the goal of getting out of special ed and being with regular kids. Because see, I also argued segregation when I was in special ed in the 1960s. They separated us regular special ed students from the regular kids. We were not allowed to be around regular kids in school unless it was recess time, or special activities like music in the auditorium where we sang together, and certain curriculum activities that the school integrated. Other than that, recess time or if we're walking home from school, we were not allowed to associate or be integrated. And I would argue with that with my school psychologist. Well, in the 70s, when they came with the transition program, integrating special ed students with regular classes, I decided to get involved in being my own spy. Well, the first thing I did was start questioning the school psychologists and my teachers and demanding that I get my school records and look at them, because I had every right to see what my school records look like. Well, I got integrated into my special ed classes. I got integrated into regular classes. I took regular English, regular drama. I was in the choir. I was in one of the committees in junior high and regular school. So I did really, really well. The school psychologist tested me, and of course, I was disappointed. She decided to keep me in special ed and go to Grossmont High School special ed. Well, I decided to go another angle. I went ahead and went as a minor. Mind you not, Sam, as a minor, I decided to sabotage the school. I went into the teacher's files. I went into the office files. I would copy and take notes of all the school records about me. I would duplicate them and sneak behind the back and duplicate them and get as much data as I could. Then when I went to Grossmont High School special ed, I decided to talk to the school psychologist and go to administration and demand that I get referred to a psychologist to test me. They listened to me, and I told them how I felt. They referred me to a Filipino school psychologist, Ben Napili, who specialized in testing special ed students, and so to get out of special ed to regular classes. Well, they referred me to the right psychologist, who finally took my side, and I told him my background in detail, and then he left me in his office. I went and sneaked and looked at all the records. Then he decided to test me. And so then I got tested. They told my parents the test results and said I was ready to get out of special ed and go into regular classes.